Hi, Jude.
Hi, Alessio. Good to see you.
Welcome. Nice to see you. I'm so excited to be here
Yeah.
to do our first podcast together.
Our first one. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
first of many, I hope.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
so welcome to our audience to the
Yeah. Welcome.
Queering IFS podcast by Jude and Alessio. We thought we'd introduce ourselves first to break the ice, uh, right?
Yeah.
Um, So should I go first or would you like to go first,
You
Jude?
go first.
I go
That's
first.
all good.
So, my name is Alessio. I use he, they as pronouns. And I have come to this point, and I'm very excited actually to be doing this with Jude, because we are both a big part of the IFS community, in particular of the queer and neurodiverse uh, piece of the IFS community. And recently we presented at the 2024 conference on neuroqueering IFS. I am a queer therapist. I also identify as neurodivergent, in particular, I'm dyslexic. And I have other small forms of neurodivergence, including Ehlers-Danlos, hypermobility, and bits and pieces of autism, although not diagnosed. And we don't need a diagnosis, but I already feel parts of me exposed to some forums and places where they kind of say, oh, you should get a diagnosis, but we'll get that at some
We'll
point,
get to that.
Jude, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so I am an IFS therapist, but I'm also a trainer for the IFS Institute, currently an assistant trainer. I am an approved clinical consultant for the IFS Institute, and I live and practice from the UK only online and practice mainly IFS, almost exclusively IFS. Anyway, I think that's as much as my brain allows me to remember right now for introducing myself. So, Jude, why don't you
Yeah,
tell
sure.
us about you?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Jude. I am also an IFS certified IFS therapist and approved clinical consultant. I also live and work in the UK, only online as well. I am diagnosed ADHD and self-diagnosed autistic with a sprinkling of dyslexia and dyscalculia in the mix as well. And as Alessio was saying, I think it's really important that I also say now that self-diagnosis, as far as we're concerned, and in most of the neurodivergent community, is equal to and as valid, if not more, and I might get to that when we talk about diagnosis, than medical diagnoses, because it's about your lived experience and you know you. Um,
Absolutely.
that's me. I think that's all my brain will allow me to remember as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And then we were going to say why we're here, why we're doing this.
yes.
Yeah.
So, what comes to mind, Jude, would be maybe nice to give the same intro that we gave at the conference, just telling people our slightly different journeys and how we came
Yeah.
into neuroqueering
Yeah. And
together.
I totally forgot to say anything about my queerness, didn't I, just then? So yeah, I
Would you like
use
to say
she.
more?
Yeah, let's. This is what happens when we rely on our brains. Um, yeah, I also
Beautiful
use
things happen when we rely on our
beautiful things
brains.
happen. Beautiful things happen when we rely on our brains, and sometimes I forget things. So yeah, I also use she, they pronouns. I variously identified under different parts of the queer umbrella, but I would say I'm genderqueer, pansexual, um, and those feel like the most fitting labels for me at the moment.
Beautiful. I realized that I haven't said much about my queer identities either, but maybe it's for another episode. But yeah, I think when we talk about our journeys, it's how we. I mean, I got to meet you in person, right, Jude, during a PA assignment. We were program assistants for a training, for a level 1 training for IFS in Bristol.
Yeah.
And I come mainly from an LGBTQIA. Now, notice I had to write it down because with all the AI that we've got going on, my brain cannot say LGBTQIA anymore. Dyslexia central. But yeah, that. So I must apologize in advance for the many times I'll get it wrong, but LGBTQIA plus should be the right way to say it. So I come mainly from that background. My entire training as a psychotherapist, I served the LGBTQIA community. I've always been open and out as an LGBT therapist. It's on my website. I don't hide it from anybody professionally nor personally. So that was my entry into queering, and we'll talk more about that later. And then the more I discovered myself and the more I started to work with neurodivergent people, because as I was training to become a psychotherapist, I was still teaching in school. So I was a maths teacher here in the UK. And I started to work with ADHD students, with autistic students, and then started to realize I could actually work with them. It was okay. It was fine. But then, many other people had not been able to connect with these students, which then made me think, okay, how come it's so spontaneous to me? And the more I researched and learned about these names that we give to these differences, the more I found myself to be one. And dyslexia had always been, my father is dyslexic, for example, and I thought, duh, of course, that's me again. I cannot remember dates or sequences. It's just impossible for my brain. So I slowly embraced neurodiversity. I discovered, or helped many of my clients discover, that they are neurodiverse as well. And then I met Jude. That kind of comes almost at the same point from a different direction. So can you say?
Yeah, so I was, I guess coming. So I've been a therapist for many years as well, and I've always been. I always used to, when I worked in services, get the neurodivergent clients who were not dissimilar to what you're saying, the ones that other people found difficult. And for the recording, that's for the audio, that's in inverted commas, difficult, or people couldn't work with, or whatever else. And I never really saw the issue. I was like, oh, this is we understand each other. This is absolutely fine, without a reflection on what that might mean for me. And we'll get onto this later as well, I think, in terms of late diagnosis and who does and doesn't get diagnosed or recognize their own neurodiversity due to various societal assumptions about gender, for one. And then maybe about 4 or 5 years ago was when I did realize my own ADHDness as a start, through listening to a lecture, a psychotherapy lecture, and realizing that, in fact, rather than talking about my client, it was talking about me. And that was concurrent with my IFS journey, and I think, my queerness journey as well, have all been kind of at the same time. And so we're just on that for a few years. And then, was doing a being a program assistant on a level 1 and met Alessio. And I think in our staff meeting before we even started, before I'd met anybody, I knew that it was really important for me and my parts and my system to, when I was introducing myself, say something about my identity as neurodivergent. And Alessio was the other person in the room. And using my pronouns, and Alessio was the other person in the room who said, I really appreciate you speaking for neurodivergence. And actually that's something, I don't remember exactly what you said, but that was our first
Yeah.
moment of connection. And then,
Yeah.
and now here we are.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful. And the importance of sharing pronouns and divergence from the outset, as opposed to, I don't know, especially as a staff member, someone who represents the organization. But yeah, it was an important moment. When you say, a moment of your life, I thought, oh yeah, because it's rare. Usually I'm the only one who holds the, I don't want to say the burden, but almost the responsibility for representing those communities. And it makes such a big difference every time I speak in staff meetings or in trainings in front of participants. Just to say that there's always at least 2 participants who feel empowered and liberated. And of course, that sharing is what got us here, Jude. So the importance of sharing a little bit of minority identity.
Absolutely.
So
And I find the same, whenever I'm in a big group and I say something about neurodivergence, whether other people in that big group then go, oh, me too, in that moment, or otherwise often if it's a training or something, then you'll be in the lunch queue or getting a tea and coffee, and then someone will come up to you and say, I think I was wondering about whether I'm autistic or whether I'm ADHD or whether my partner is. So it really opens doors.
Yeah.
Mm.
So getting back to our loose plan, is it, why are we here, right?
What brought us here? Yeah. A lot of conversations around these topics, I would say.
A lot of conversations, true. Also desire for a less structured way of presenting to the public, because when you see a presentation, when you have a workshop to do, you always get like an edited version of it, but there's so much that comes out every time I speak to you, Jude, that I think part of what we are planning to do is to share our conversations, really.
Exactly.
We might not give many answers, but I believe there is a lot of merit in listening to, our curiosity about various aspects of queerness, neurodiversity, and IFS.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there isn't a huge amount of information available. There's people doing amazing work in this field, and really want to celebrate all of the different voices and all of the different people running trainings, writing things, presenting. It's not just us, but in terms of the information that's out there and available to maybe therapists and practitioners, or maybe people who are looking for IFS for themselves, who are queer or neurodivergent or a mixture of both, or any other marginalised identities. It's not a huge amount available without needing to go on a training or without some kind of pay wall in front of it.
Yeah, and I like that you talk about wall, and I think one of the latest phrases you gifted me, Jude, is the what was it called? Access fatigue, right?
Yes.
How
Yeah.
difficult it is to access good information. And
Exactly.
this information exists, but if you Google it, you just have to go through quite a lot of other information, because the moment you go into neurodiversity, queer, maybe less so with queerness, but you get a lot of medical words,
Yeah.
difficult to get. And even when it comes to IFS, you either need to go to a paid for course, maybe even one of our courses, right, Jude?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
Which
need
are
to
great.
buy, yeah, or you need to buy a book, but then the book has been written for professionals. So
Yeah.
we're kind of trying to also provide information that's accessible to the public somewhat,
Yeah.
um, because because the public and people who are neurodivergent, who are queer, encounter a lot of barriers when it comes to therapy. So it's important even for them to to know that they can request certain things of their therapists, from
Yeah.
language to respecting self-diagnosis, like we said earlier. Um, so I guess it's important to hear professionals talk about these things, to
Absolutely.
empower people, anybody who is interested in learning more.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is for, well, anyone who has an interest in these areas, but it's also not just for therapists and practitioners, and we hope it's got a broader
Yeah,
reach.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's amazing that a lot of people have come to our workshops and our conference talk, and they've given us good feedback. That's why we
Mm.
got quite interested and
Yeah.
enthusiastic in doing this. But it's also true that if the public is educated and they start asking for their
Hmm.
therapists to be knowledgeable,
Yeah.
to be trained, to be competent, that also encourages professionals to seek information. So I guess it's for anybody who is interested in accessing therapy that is friendly and accessible to neurodiverse and queer people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does that cover what brought us here? Well, yeah, I guess so. But maybe it's also worth saying, I think it's important to say that part of that is also because we are aware that not all therapy is so great for queer and neurodivergent
Oh my God.
clients.
Oh yes.
There are a lot of ways that therapists can let clients down through lack of knowledge, through lack of awareness. Um, and that's a reality. A lot of clients will come having not had great experiences. So that was the other reason for making this just available for people to say, hey, look, there are ways that therapy can work for you with the right inf- with with the right information, with the right therapist, with the right everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for this, making it very explicit, Jude. I am currently fresh from preparing some material for um, for two lectures on um, polyamorous clients and for kink
Mm,
clients, who are also kind of underrepresented areas of the LGBTQIA community. And there is research that shows how it takes even it takes courage to share that you know you belong to a minority somehow, Like when you and I shared our pronouns and our neurodiversity, right now it is the exception, right? So we live and we swim in a world where minorities need to kind of have courage to express themselves. And the therapy room in theory should be that place without judgment, yet it could be a look that your therapist gives you. It could be the fact that all of a sudden what you're sharing becomes the problem. Like the problem is not that I'm polyamorous and therefore it should be, I will feel better if I have less than one, less than two or more relationships, right? The problem isn't that I'm autistic, easily that becomes the problem. Or it can go the other way, that the therapist just let it just go and leaves the client to bring it up again and again without appreciating how much courage it took maybe to share, I'm ADHD.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that might not go as well as one would hope it went in a professional service that usually you pay a lot of money for. Many people I know, because then I meet friends and colleagues, and I ask them. They usually tell me they do therapy, and I ask them how is it going, and many of them struggle to bring up some topics to their therapist, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to bring it up, so it is in the air, it's in the field, and I haven't heard anybody speaking to the public about it, to be honest, to the end users, to those ones who go to therapy to say, not just
this could be better.
Yes, you deserve a space where you can talk about these things in a way that's good for you. I think that covers the topic.
I think we've established why we're here.
I think, So what else did we want to talk about for this first episode?
We should probably say what IFS is. Because we talked about being IFS therapists.
And also, what is queering?
What is queering?
General. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Right. So what is IFS? Where do we start?
Great question. Well, let's do a short answer because people can find long answers in lots of different places.
Yes.
In terms of the model, you can find really good information on the IFS Institute website, for example.
Or on my blog.
Or on Alessio's fabulous blog. Yes. Yeah, you should go there. But ultimately, internal family systems IFS is a model of therapy that we both practice. You could also see it as more than a model of therapy. It's just a way of seeing humans, that we have a system of parts within us and self. Yes. And parts. I'm not a big fan of sub-personalities. How do you feel about that phrase?
Neutral, I would say. I don't mind it, but it doesn't speak much to me.
What would you? Yeah,
because
go on, please.
It almost somehow makes them less than.
Right, sub personalities.
As if there is a main personality and then a sub personality. I like parts more.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I know it took me a while to understand fully what parts are and what the self is, which in IFS terms is a different thing from parts.
And something we could definitely deep dive on at some point.
Absolutely. It's a very personal yet elusive concept. And maybe it's good that it stays elusive because it really encourages people to find and get in contact with their own self, and definitely with their own parts. Parts being, so if we don't use sub personalities, I think we can describe them as almost little people that almost live inside of our system. A little in the sense that they might not have all the same full development that we might have somehow. So there could be younger parts, there could be parts that share our age. But generally, parts are more kind of are less physical in a way. They're like energies also at times, and they share this physicality that we have.
And we have parts that have different roles. So we have parts that protect us, parts that might and then parts that are, or that we call in IFS exiles, or sometimes we call them little ones that carry the burdens of things that have happened to us. And through the process of IFS, we help clients to know what it is for them to find their own self energy, to be in self, and also to meet their parts from this place, to create change in the system, to allow protectors to maybe relax or change roles if they want to, and for those exiles to be unburdened. It's a beautiful model. I think we can both agree.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think the queering of the IFS model starts already here somehow.
Yeah.
And because even as we try to use the names of protectors, exiles, I think IFS uses this language because it's been developed mainly as a trauma treatment modality. So therefore, all the parts that we name are those ones that are encountered when dealing with trauma treatment, right? So, but if we had discovered, or if we look at IFS from another perspective with another focus, we might give different names to the parts, or we might meet different parts. So yeah, parts are, when there is trauma, they organize in exiles that hold the burdens, and then protectors that try for that pain not to come to the surface again. And when there is no trauma, though, then parts just do their own things, like our organs do their own things, and we don't even notice them. But usually when you have a stomach pain, it's because there is something bad with your stomach. Sometimes I like to think about parts this way, that if a part is kind of knocking at my consciousness, wants some attention, it's usually because something needs healing, or there is an issue. Otherwise, they just do their own thing and everything is good.
And speaking of trauma, one thing that's quite unifying in neurodivergent, neuroqueer, queer populations is that we probably have had some trauma with being marginalised identities, whether it's something we've known about ourselves or not, through experience of being in a world that is more heteronormative and neurotypical as well.
Yeah.
A world that is much more heteronormative and neurotypical than maybe we are.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll have an entire episode on this one that I'm going to say now. It's that neurodivergence and queerness are not parts, which is all part of an element of neuronormativity or heteronormativity, that somehow every difference from the norm can be easily classed as part that can be therefore changed and stuff. And And that's a big piece that we're going to get to.
Yeah, it is a big piece, and if anyone's ears are pricking up right now, saying what's this? Then
Yeah,
we will be
there'll be an
talking
episode on
about
that.
this, but it is an episode worthy subject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go to the idea of what is queering. And
Yes.
I know by myself that I kind of do it automatically, but Jude, do you mind if I let you provide the official definition of queerness? So definitely a more academic one than I can produce
Okay.
right now.
Well, yes.
Do you
I
mind?
can try. So I came across queering when I was doing my research masters, which was about 25 years ago, from an academic perspective, where this was in social sciences, where querying was a process of questioning and subverting and asking why about taken for granted cultural norms and assumptions, mostly around heteronormativity. So heteronormativity being the way we assume that the norm is heterosexuality, that we assume a couple means one man and one woman, um, and everything else that entails. So queering came up through academia as a way of questioning this and saying, well, hang on, why? Why is this? How is this, and why is this? And the way that that this norm was embedded in everything, embedded in research, embedded in literature, embedded as this. This is the truth. This is status quo, and of course, it isn't.
Mm.
It's a lens. It's a perspective, but it is not. There is no universal truth around what is normal, what is right, and so I've been in this kind of queering, questioning academic world for a long time, but then more recently coming to the concept of, well, and of course, well, so that's queering, academic queering, but then there's also queerness, which is a massive umbrella, which maybe you would say more about what that means,
Mm.
Alessio.
Yeah, sure. For me, queerness is all the umbrella that includes, let's say, the divergence from heterosexuality. It
Mm-hmm.
includes uh, both two dimensions, really, dimensions of gender and sexuality. And it's beautiful to see so many different names and labels that get created as people embrace their identities. But um, it's at the moment you don't feel like you're attracted to people of the opposite sex, and that definition already goes into
Mm,
an undefined and not well-defined ground. Then you're heterosexual, and any deviation from that really is considered to be queer. There are
mm-hmm.
within the queer community there are identities that get more media coverage, like maybe the gay community or the lesbian. Then we have got the transgender, and that's already bleeding into gender. So then we
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
different gender identities from agendered to non-binary. In terms of sexuality, we have asexuality, we have demisexual, we have pansexual, we have bisexual. So yeah, that's quite a lot, which shows how come we haven't really looked into
Mm,
that earlier, and
mm, mm.
heterosexuality has been kept as this best
Yeah,
and better of all.
yeah.
And
And
I think
until, oh, sorry, go on.
I'm just aware of time a bit. I think
Yeah,
we've
yeah.
gone on longer than we should. Well,
Of course
we
we have.
planned, of course. So I was hoping to move on to the final piece of this one, which is
Yeah,
why are we queer in IFS? But by
I
all
just,
means,
yeah, and I just wanted to say, it's that it's important to hear in queering and queerness and how these things come together, that both of these, queer used to be a slur, It used to be an insult, mostly aimed at gay people. And it was reclaimed as through the political movements of the 70s and 80s, to be this label that queer, that we embrace now as with pride. And queering was also a political movement to question and subvert these kind of this heteronormative dogma that kept everything else out, kept everything else down. So it's important to say these are words with energy, these are words with charge, and it's a process, and it's really important. What would you like to move on to?
Well, exactly to this one, the queering of IFS, really.
Yes.
So thank you for what you just put our attention on, because the queering of IFS hasn't really got much to do to making, I don't know, IFS gay or making it LGBT friendly. It's about questioning and trying as much as possible to understand how much IFS has been influenced by normativity of any kind in its conception and conceptualization, because inevitably it's been created in a world that is heteronormative and neuronormative. So we're just looking at these two aspects here as neuroqueering. Yet there is a lot there. We want to ask in this journey together, we will question how much heteronormativity is contained implicitly almost in IFS, and how much neuronormativity exists already there, and also how then not only it is embedded in the model, but also who uses the model can also perpetrate further neuronormativity and heteronormativity. So that's why we want to speak to the users, to those ones who use IFS for work, for their own growth, and also to the tools themselves, in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. And it feels important to say, because we've mentioned the term a couple of times now, that neuroqueering, which comes from Nick Walker's work, which I'm sure we will come back to again through these podcasts, is the simultaneous queering of neuronormativity and heteronormativity at the same time, these things being linked. And we will definitely come back to that. But I felt it was important to say, in case anyone's wondering what the hell that term means as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And Alessio, you've talked before about IFS being a model which queers the mind.
Yes, true.
And we've talked before about that. So there is something about IFS that can be quite liberating from other therapy models in terms of how we approach the individual and what they and their subjective experience of themselves. And we're also queering IFS.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, probably that's why both you and I and many other people who represent different diversities and minorities are more and more interested and invested in IFS, is because in itself, it contains a lot of ideas that have queered the usual way of thinking about psychotherapy and the person in general. We say multiplicity of mind, like different parts, to indicate that with IFS, we don't believe there is just one thought and one mind doing all the thinking at once. And there is more querying that has happened there. Like the whole concept of self is quite revolutionary. The founder, Richard Schwartz, wrote an entire book called No Bad Parts to put this point across, that what we label as bad behavior doesn't mean that inherently we are bad. That actually at the core of who we are, there is this self-presence who exudes compassion, curiosity, courage, and other things starting with C that I don't remember at the minute. But so that's in itself, IFS is doing a lot, and we want to take it further. Because why not?
Yeah. Okay. Does that feel like we've ticked our boxes for our
I
first
think
one?
so, Jude. Is there anything you want
Yeah.
to add before we wrap this first
We can
episode
wrap.
up?
Yeah. Shall we say where people can find out more? So
Mhm.
we've got our website.
Sure.
I'm at anchoredinself.co.uk.
And I'm at therapywithalessio.com.
Yeah. And we
Yeah,
hope you've enjoyed this today.
yeah. I'm thinking if there are other links, but we can put them maybe in writing somewhere around where
Yeah.
we put this podcast. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening.
yes. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Jude.
Thank you, Alessio. And we'll be back with more.
Absolutely. Bye bye.
Bye.